Picture the ultimate fantasy. You wake up tomorrow, and you possess the modern equivalent of $1 billion. You never have to work another day in your life. You step out of bed in a sprawling sunlit mansion. A private staff is waiting quietly to anticipate your every move. You have finally made it. You are completely, totally untouchable. At least, that's what you think. But as you walk toward your front door, you realize there is a catch, a terrifying one. Your money hasn't bought you freedom. It hasn't bought you peace. Instead, it has made you the ultimate target in a ruthless, high-stakes game of survival. Because you didn't wake up in modern-day New York or Dubai, you woke up in ancient Rome. And you are about to find out that being a billionaire in the ancient world was less of a dream and more of an exhausting, waking nightmare. Here is the problem. If you simply woke up rich in the ancient world, but you didn't have the right connections, the loyal clients, the political armor, and a deep understanding of Roman unwritten rules, you wouldn't survive the month. You wouldn't be the master of the universe. You would be prey. You would be relentlessly attacked through the courts, ruined by vicious rumors, crushed by fabricated debts, or simply stripped of everything you own by a jealous emperor. Today, extreme wealth is basically a fortress. It buys you privacy, offshore accounts, gated communities, and private security. But in ancient Rome, wealth was an open stage. It was a terrifying, exhausting, 24/7 theatrical performance. You weren't a player, you were the loot, unless you knew exactly how to play a very brutal, social game. Let's look at a typical morning. If you were a Roman elite, your day started long before the sun came up. But you weren't waking up early to do a cold plunge, meditate, or write in your gratitude journal. You were waking up because you had to put on a toga. And by the way, a proper Roman toga was a massive, heavy, complex woolen garment that was physically impossible to put on by yourself. Needing someone else to dress you was the very first flex of the day. You needed to get dressed quickly because right outside your bedroom door, a crowd was waiting. Imagine opening your phone right now and seeing you have 1 million followers. Now, imagine if 1,000 of those followers physically showed up in your living room every single morning. They are loud, they are demanding, they want money, they want a job, they want you to represent them in a lawsuit. This was a daily ritual called the salutatio, and it wasn't charity. It was a cold, calculated transaction. As the rich patron, you would walk through this sea of people handing out small baskets of food or coins called sportulae. In exchange, you were buying a mob. You were buying an entourage that would follow you through the streets of Rome, parting the crowds, and loudly announcing to everyone how incredibly important you were. This was the ancient equivalent of a follower count. And your status was essentially a daily subscription service that you had to renew every single morning. If you usually had 1,000 people at your door, and one morning only 500 showed up, there was blood in the water. Your political rivals would instantly notice the drop in your influence, and they would prepare to strike. So, to make sure that crowd never left for a competitor, the ancient elites had to pay some of the most insane bills in human history. And the things they spent their fortunes on would make today's billionaires look like absolute amateurs. Which brings us to the economics of paranoia. Why did they spend so much money so recklessly? Why blow an entire fortune on a single dinner party or a public game? The answer is fear. In the ancient world, there was no such thing as a limited liability company. There was no modern insurance, no S&P 500, and absolutely no bankruptcy protection. If your merchant ships sank in a storm, you didn't just take a hit to your net worth, you were ruined. If an emperor decided you were getting too influential, you didn't just get canceled on social media, your property was confiscated, and you were left with nothing. Your only real insurance policy was your reputation. The Romans called it fama. Your ultimate goal was to project an aura of such overwhelming power and untouchable wealth that absolutely no one would dare to challenge you. Your spending wasn't just flexing, it was your armor. Take your house, for example. A wealthy Roman domus wasn't designed to be a cozy private sanctuary. When someone walked through your front door, they were intentionally funneled through a narrow, dark corridor that suddenly exploded into a massive, brilliantly lit atrium with a reflecting pool. This was a calculated mind game. Your house was a public office specifically designed to crush the ego of anyone who walked in. It was a building that screamed, "I am better than you, and I have the money to prove it." Then there was the dinner party, the cena. Food wasn't just a meal, it was a power play. We're talking about wildly absurd dishes like sausages cleverly stuffed inside a whole roasted pig. But the most aggressive power plays happened with the drinks and the menu. A host might serve 3 completely different tiers of quality at the exact same table. If you were a VIP, you got the finest vintage. If you were just a regular client, you got something mediocre. And if you were a freedman or a lower-tier guest, you were explicitly served cheap, watered-down vinegar. Imagine being at a modern corporate dinner where the boss is served a 5-star gourmet steak and you are handed a cheap, stale sandwich, just so you remember exactly where you stand in the hierarchy. The guests on the lower tier always noticed, but the ultimate PR stunt, and the fastest way to burn cash, was sponsoring the games. When a Roman politician paid for public combat and spectacles, he wasn't doing it to entertain the masses. It was a ruthless political campaign. You spend millions to import exotic leopards from Africa. The crowd cheers at the breathtaking spectacle, and that same crowd votes for you in the next election. And this intense culture of status created some truly bizarre consumer habits. In the ancient world, even the body of a famous athlete could be turned into a commodity. After training or fighting, athletes would scrape their bodies with a curved metal tool called the strigil, removing a thick mixture of sweat, dirt, and expensive oils. This grime was actually collected, bottled, and sold at a premium as a medical treatment. You'll often see the internet call this gladiator perfume. Historically, that phrasing is a bit of a myth, but the reality is actually crazier. The ancient market already knew how to bottle and sell a person's fame. If that sounds wild to you, just remember that today, superfans will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars at auction to buy a rock star's half-eaten toast, or a pair of unwashed, sweaty sneakers worn by a famous basketball player. Human nature hasn't changed in 2,000 years. The merch is just slightly different. Everything in this system gleamed with gold and smelled of expensive oils. But if you look closely, right beneath the polished marble floors of this flex economy, you will find a dark secret, a reality that never makes it into the travel brochures. Who was actually running this astronomical burn rate? Who was importing the exotic animals, building the atriums, pinning the elaborate hairstyles, and managing the sprawling estates? The entire system of ancient luxury was built on the backs of an invisible army of enslaved human beings. We cannot romanticize ancient wealth because its foundation was the absolute control over other people. Enslaved people were the smart home technology of antiquity. They were the logistics, the production, and the infrastructure. To give you an idea of the sheer scale of this, the Roman writer Pliny the Elder tells the story of a man named Gaius Secilius Isidorus. This man had actually lost a massive portion of his fortune during the civil wars, and yet, when he died, his will revealed that he still owned 4,116 slaves, over 4,000 human beings, listed as property on a legal document. So, why did they need this massive, tragic machine? What were these ancient elites actually buying with all this money and human capital? They were buying the one thing that no amount of modern hustle can afford today. They were buying the right to time. The ancient Greeks had a specific word for this: Schole. It's actually where we get the modern word school. But for them, Schole didn't mean laziness. It meant having the absolute freedom to exist without a schedule. It was the space to think, to debate philosophy, to walk through a garden, or to simply do absolutely nothing. The Romans adopted a very similar idea, calling it Otium, a dignified, untouchable leisure. In the ancient world, if you were working, stressing over deadlines, taking orders, or rushing to close a deal, you were fundamentally viewed as lower class. Work, anxiety, and hustle were for people who didn't have real power. Which brings us to a massive, uncomfortable truth about the 21st century. Today, we've been sold the idea that wealth equals endless, non-stop hustle. We admire the modern CEO, the tech founder, or the crypto billionaire who wakes up at 4 a.m., jumps into an ice bath, listens to a podcast on 2 times speed to optimize their brain, and works 16 hours a day, constantly tethered to a smartphone. But if a wealthy Roman senator were to travel through time and look at a modern tech billionaire or your average startup founder, he wouldn't see an equal. He wouldn't see a master of the universe. He would see a highly stressed, desperately anxious, incredibly well-paid prisoner to his own schedule. Someone who does not belong to himself for a single second of the day. For the ancients, true wealth wasn't about how much you could get done. It was about the absolute absence of hustle. They believed that if you couldn't afford to just stare at a wall for half the day without feeling guilty or losing money, you were a poor man, no matter how many zeros were in your bank account. So, take a hard look at your own schedule today. Strip away the notifications, the emails, and the optimization hacks. How many hours a day do you actually belong to yourself? Let me know down in the comments. By ancient standards, are you a truly free person or just another worker in the empire? I read every single comment, and I can't wait to see your thoughts. If this video changed your perspective on wealth and the modern hustle, hit that like button. It's a small click for you, but it sends a huge signal to the algorithm to push deep, analytical content like this to more people. And if you want to keep exploring the hidden truths behind money, power, and history, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We're building a community of thinkers who look beyond the surface. Thank you for watching. Remember, your time is the only asset you can never buy back. Guard it well. See you in the next video.